The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Eleanor Washington made her way home from Green's grocery. At 68, she moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had spent decades commanding respect. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the spring warmth, she wore her favorite navy cardigan over a simple blouse. Eleanor carried 2 paper bags of groceries, one heavier than the other with a carton of milk and a small roast for Sunday dinner. Eleanor had taken this route home for nearly 40 years, long before she became the city's first black female police chief, and even longer before her retirement 3 years ago. The path took her past Franklin High School, a sprawling brick building where teenagers now spilled out into the sunshine, their school day finally over. Most days, Eleanor enjoyed watching the young people, their energy, their laughter, even their dramatic complaints about teachers and homework. They reminded her of her own grandchildren, though they lived 3 states away and she only saw them on holidays and video calls. But something felt different today. She noticed a group of boys lingering near the school gate, nudging each other and looking in her direction. Eleanor had spent 35 years reading people, sensing trouble before it happened. Those instincts didn't disappear with retirement. She adjusted her grip on her grocery bags and kept walking, her pace steady. She didn't quicken her step. That would show fear. But she remained alert, her eyes forward while her attention stayed on the group. "Hey, Grandma," one of the boys called out. He was tall and lanky, wearing a red hoodie despite the warm weather. "Need help with those bags? You look like you might break something." His friends laughed, 5 of them now, all moving toward her with the loose-limbed swagger of teenagers trying to look tougher than they were. Eleanor had seen it thousands of times before, young people testing boundaries, seeing what they could get away with. "I'm fine, thank you," Eleanor replied calmly, her voice carrying the natural authority that had served her well throughout her career. "Aw, she's fine," mocked another boy, this one shorter with a baseball cap turned backward. "She doesn't need our help, guys." Eleanor continued walking, the grocery store fading behind her, her small yellow house still 6 blocks ahead. The boys fell into step around her, not exactly blocking her path but making it clear she was surrounded. "What's in the bags, Grandma? Got anything good?" asked a boy with shaggy brown hair and a faded jean jacket. "Just groceries," Eleanor replied, her tone neutral but firm. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd let me pass." "We're not stopping you," said Red Hoodie, spreading his hands in mock innocence. "We're just being friendly." "Right, guys?" The others nodded and snickered. They were testing her, seeing how much they could rattle her. Eleanor had dealt with hardened criminals who used the same tactics: intimidation through proximity, through numbers, through the suggestion of threat rather than an outright one. A young girl walking on the other side of the street noticed what was happening and quickly crossed to avoid the group. Eleanor caught her eye and gave a small nod that said, "It's okay, keep going." The girl hurried past, glancing back with worry. "Don't you boys have somewhere to be?" Eleanor asked, stopping at the corner to wait for the light to change. "Homework, jobs? Sports practice?" "Nah, we're free as birds today," said Baseball Cap, moving uncomfortably close to Eleanor's side. She could smell mint gum and the faint odor of cigarettes on his clothes. "We thought we'd walk with you. Make sure you get home safe. Dangerous neighborhood for an old lady." The light changed and Eleanor stepped forward, maintaining her dignity. The paper grocery bags were growing heavy in her arms, but decades of discipline kept her from showing any strain. She'd carried equipment heavier than this through far worse situations during her years on the force. "This neighborhood is perfectly safe," Eleanor said, allowing a hint of steel to enter her voice. "I've lived here for 43 years. 43 years. Wow, that's like ancient," Red Hoodie said, exaggerating his amazement. "You probably remember when they built the school, huh?" "Actually, I do," Eleanor replied, deciding to engage rather than ignore. Sometimes conversation diffused tension better than silence. They broke ground in 1985. I was on crowd control for the opening ceremony when Mayor Thompson cut the ribbon. This information momentarily confused the boys, who exchanged glances. "You were a security guard or something?" asked the quietest of the group, a boy with thick glasses who had been hanging back slightly. "Something like that," Eleanor said with the ghost of a smile. They were approaching a narrow section of sidewalk where construction had closed half the path. Eleanor would need to navigate this carefully with her groceries while keeping an eye on the boys. "Hey, let me help you with that," said Jean Jacket suddenly, reaching for one of her bags. No, thank you, Eleanor said firmly. I don't need help. But the boy persisted, grabbing at the corner of the paper bag. Come on, it's heavy. I'm just trying to be nice. I said no, Eleanor repeated, pulling the bag back. The sudden movement caused the paper to tear, and 3 oranges spilled out, rolling across the sidewalk and into the street. One of the boys laughed. Now look what you did, said Red Hoodie, though he made no move to help retrieve the fallen fruit. Eleanor took a deep breath. This was the moment when things could escalate or de-escalate. She'd faced this crossroads countless times throughout her career. A suspect getting agitated, a witness becoming defensive, a rookie officer challenging her authority. Please pick those up, she said to Jean Jacket, her voice calm but leaving no room for argument. It was the same tone she had used when commanding officers at crime scenes. Why should I? The boy challenged, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You dropped them. Because it's the right thing to do, Eleanor replied. And because I asked you to. Baseball Cap stepped forward then, nudging Jean Jacket. Don't do it, man. She's not the boss of you. Eleanor set her remaining grocery bag down carefully on a nearby bench and straightened up to her full height. She wasn't tall, just 5'4", but she carried herself with such natural dignity that she seemed taller. Young man, she said, looking Jean Jacket directly in the eyes. We all have choices in this life. Small ones that seem meaningless and bigger ones that shape who we become. Right now you're choosing to harass an elderly woman walking home with her groceries. Is that really who you want to be? The directness of her gaze made Jean Jacket shift uncomfortably. For a moment, Eleanor could see past the bravado to the uncertain teenager beneath. She'd seen that look before, in the eyes of young offenders who still had a chance to turn their lives around, who weren't yet hardened by the system. Whatever, he muttered. But he bent down and picked up the closest orange. Red Hoodie wasn't ready to back down. He stepped closer to Eleanor, entering her personal space. Why don't you just go home and knit something, Grandma? Nobody wants you here. Eleanor didn't step back. She'd faced down armed suspects and violent criminals. This boy with his practiced sneer and rehearsed toughness didn't frighten her. I belong in this neighborhood just as much as you do, she said evenly. And I've been here a lot longer. Yeah? Well, times change, Red Hoodie said, reaching out as if to push her shoulder. Eleanor's reaction was instinctive and immediate. She shifted her weight slightly, creating distance while maintaining her balance. A defensive move so subtle it looked like nothing more than an elderly woman adjusting her stance. Don't touch me, she said, her voice suddenly carrying such authority that Red Hoodie's hand froze midair. There was something in her eyes now, something that made the boy hesitate. It wasn't fear. It was the unmistakable look of someone who had faced down much worse and remained standing. A passing car slowed down, the driver watching the scene with concern. Eleanor gave a small nod to indicate she was okay, and the car reluctantly moved on. But its presence had been enough to make the boys glance around, suddenly more aware they were in public, that their actions had witnesses. Baseball Cap tugged at Red Hoodie's arm. Come on, let's go. This is boring. Red Hoodie held Eleanor's gaze for a moment longer, then shrugged as if the whole thing had been meaningless to him. Yeah, whatever. See you around, Grandma. I expect you will, Eleanor replied calmly, watching as the group started to move away, their postures already relaxing now that they were abandoning their intimidation attempt. Jean Jacket, however, hesitated. He looked at the orange in his hand, then bent down and picked up the other 2 that had rolled nearby. Awkwardly, he held them out to Eleanor. Here, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. Thank you, Eleanor said, accepting them with dignity. The boy nodded once, then hurried to catch up with his friends who were already halfway down the block, their voices carrying back as they found new topics to joke about. Eleanor watched them go, then carefully placed the oranges back in what remained of the torn bag. She gathered her groceries and continued her walk home, her pace unhurried and steady. The confrontation had been minor compared to many she'd faced, but it troubled her nonetheless. Not because she had felt threatened, but because she saw potential being wasted. Young men choosing to intimidate rather than respect, to tear down rather than build up. As she turned onto Maple Street, where her small yellow hoe, Hughes, stood waiting, Eleanor made a mental note to call her friend Thomas, who still worked at the community center. Those boys needed guidance, not punishment. And Eleanor Washington had never been one to look away from a problem she might be able to solve. She climbed the 3 steps to her front porch, grocery bag still in hand, already forming a plan. Retirement didn't mean she was finished making a difference. It just meant her methods had to change. And if there was one thing Eleanor had learned in 35 years of police work, it was how to adapt to changing circumstances. Eleanor hadn't expected to see the boys again so soon. It was just 2 days after their first encounter, and she was sitting on a bench in Patterson Park enjoying the warm spring afternoon. She often came here after lunch, a well-worn paperback in her hand and a thermos of tea beside her. Today's book was an Agatha Christie mystery she'd read at least 3 times before, but she enjoyed revisiting old favorites. The park was mostly empty on weekday afternoons. A few mothers with toddlers at the small playground, the occasional jogger, and sometimes elderly folks like herself enjoying the quiet. Eleanor had just poured herself a cup of tea when she spotted them coming down the path. The same 5 boys from Friday, laughing loudly and passing a basketball between them. Red Hoodie was dribbling the ball, performing exaggerated moves as if he had an audience. Eleanor considered gathering her things and leaving, but something made her stay. She wasn't one to run from uncomfortable situations. Never had been, even before her years on the force. She took a sip of her tea and pretended to focus on her book, though her awareness remained on the approaching group. They hadn't noticed her yet, busy with their own conversation and antics. The boy in the jean jacket, the one who had picked up her oranges, stumbled as Red Hoodie passed him the ball with unexpected force, and the others laughed. Eleanor observed the group dynamics with interest. Red Hoodie was clearly the leader, with baseball cap as his main supporter. Jean Jacket and the quiet boy with glasses seemed to be followers, eager for acceptance but not quite in the inner circle. The 5th boy, who wore a gray sweatshirt and had said little during their previous encounter, hovered at the edge of the group. As they came closer, Baseball Cap spotted her. He nudged Red Hoodie and nodded in her direction. The group's laughter died down, and Eleanor felt their collective attention shift toward her. "Well, look who it is," Red Hoodie called out, bouncing the basketball deliberately as he approached her bench. "It's Grandma from the other day." Eleanor marked her place in the book with a thin leather bookmark and set it aside. "Good afternoon, boys," she said calmly. "Enjoying your day off from school?" This simple acknowledgement seemed to throw them off balance. Perhaps they'd expected her to ignore them or to look afraid. "It's a teacher workday," said the quiet boy with glasses, then looked surprised at himself for speaking. "I see," Eleanor replied with a nod. "Making good use of your free time, I hope?" Red Hoodie spun the basketball on his finger, showing off. "We're heading to the courts. Going to school some fools who think they can play." "Are you any good?" Eleanor asked, her tone genuinely curious rather than condescending. Red Hoodie blinked, clearly not expecting this question. "Am I good? Lady, I'm the best player Franklin High has seen in years. Coach says I could get a scholarship if I keep my grades up." "That's impressive," Eleanor said sincerely. She had always believed in acknowledging potential, even in those who tried to hide it behind tough exteriors. "College could open a lot of doors for you." The boys exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to this conversation that wasn't following their expected script of intimidation and resistance. Baseball Cap recovered first. "What are you doing here anyway? Isn't it nap time at the retirement home?" Some of the boys snickered, but it sounded forced. Eleanor simply smiled and gestured to the park around them. "It's a beautiful day. I've been coming to this park since before any of you were born." She picked up her thermos. "Would any of you like some tea? It's mint with honey." "We don't want your tea," Red Hoodie said, but there was less edge in his voice now. "Come on, guys, let's go." As they started to move past her bench, Jean Jacket lagged behind a bit. He glanced at Eleanor's book. "My grandmother reads those," he said. "The mystery ones. She's always trying to guess who did it before the end." "And does she guess correctly?" Eleanor asked. A small smile flickered across the boy's face. "Yeah, most of the time. She's pretty smart." "Smart runs in families," Eleanor replied gently. "Yo, Damon, you coming or what?" Red Hoodie called back impatiently. Jean Jacket, Damon, hesitated, then nodded to Eleanor before jogging to catch up with his friends. Eleanor watched them continue down the path toward the basketball courts at the far end of the park, their voices fading with distance. She picked up her book again but found herself staring at the pages without reading. There was something about those boys that bothered her, not fear for herself but concern for them. She had seen too many young men like them during her years as an officer, then as a detective, and finally as chief. Young men with potential who made bad choices because they thought they had no good ones, or because no one ever expected better from them. Eleanor was still deep in thought when the shouting started. She looked up sharply, her police instincts kicking in immediately. The sounds were coming from the direction of the basketball courts. Without hesitation, she capped her thermos, tucked her book into her bag, and stood up. Her knees protested slightly, a reminder of a chase-related injury from her 40s. But she ignored the discomfort and started walking briskly toward the commotion. As she approached the courts, she could see that a confrontation was underway. Red Hoodie and his friends were facing off against another group of boys, older, larger, and clearly unhappy. At the center of the dispute appeared to be the basketball, which one of the older boys was holding. "I don't care what your brother told you," the older boy was saying, his voice carrying across the park. "These are our courts on Mondays. Everyone knows that." "We were here first today," Red Hoodie argued back, his previous swagger now tinged with uncertainty as he faced boys who outweighed him by at least 30 pounds. "And now you're leaving," said another of the older boys, stepping forward menacingly. Eleanor increased her pace, analyzing the situation as she moved. 10 boys total, 5 in each group. The older ones appeared to be around 18 or 19, possibly recent graduates or dropouts. No visible weapons, but plenty of tension that could easily escalate to violence. One of the younger boys, the quiet one with glasses, was already backing away, looking for an exit. She had handled hundreds of similar situations in her career, though usually with a badge and a uniform that commanded immediate respect. Today she was just an elderly woman in slacks and a cardigan. But Eleanor Washington had never relied solely on her badge for authority. "Excuse me," she said as she approached, her voice clear and steady. All 10 boys turned to look at her, expressions ranging from surprise to annoyance. "Lady, you might want to head back to your bench," one of the older boys said. "This doesn't concern you." "I think it does," Eleanor replied calmly, positioning herself not between the groups but at an angle that allowed her to see everyone. "This is a public park and I'd hate to see anyone get hurt over a simple misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," said the boy holding the basketball. "These kids know Monday is our court time. They need to bounce." Eleanor looked at Red Hoodie, whose face was flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Is that true? Is there an established schedule for the courts?" For a moment she thought he might lie, but something, perhaps the direct way she asked the question, made him hesitate. "My brother told me they don't come until later," he muttered finally. "Your brother lied then," said the older boy. "We're always here at 1 o'clock. Eleanor glanced at her watch. It was just past 1. "Well, that clears things up," she said reasonably. "It seems there was a misunderstanding after all." "So they need to leave," insisted the older boy. "Perhaps," Eleanor said. "Or perhaps there's a better solution." She looked around the court. "This is a full court, correct? Couldn't you play half-court games on either end? Share the space for today, and then these young men will know to come at a different time in the future." The boys looked at each other uncertainly. The suggestion was so simple, so obvious that it seemed to deflate some of the tension. "We wanted to play full court," one of the older boys grumbled. "I understand," Eleanor said, "but sometimes compromise is better than conflict." "Don't you think?" There was a long moment of silence as the two groups assessed each other and the situation. Eleanor waited patiently. In her experience, people often needed a moment to find a way to back down without losing face. Finally, the older boy with the basketball shrugged. "Whatever. We can do half-court today. But next Monday don't show up at 1, he added, pointing at Red Hoodie. "Fine," Red Hoodie said, his relief at avoiding a fight barely hidden beneath his attempted nonchalance. As the group separated to opposite ends of the court, Damon turned to Eleanor. "Thanks," he said quietly so his friends wouldn't hear. Eleanor nodded acknowledgement, then addressed all 5 of the younger boys. "Enjoy your game. And perhaps ask your brother about the actual schedule," she added to Red Hoodie with a knowing look. As she turned to leave, Baseball Cap called after her. "Hey, how did you do that? Make them listen." Eleanor paused and looked back. I spoke to them with respect and offered a reasonable solution. People usually respond well to that approach. She smiled slightly. Even teenage boys. She walked back toward her bench, aware that all of them, younger and older boys alike, were watching her go. Eleanor didn't hurry or look back again. Let them wonder. Let them think. As she settled back onto her bench and reopened her book, she could hear the familiar sounds of 2 basketball games beginning, the rhythmic bouncing of balls, the shuffle of sneakers on concrete, the occasional shout or laugh. No anger now, just the normal sounds of young men at play. Eleanor sipped her tea, which had grown cold, and smiled to herself. Today's intervention had been simple enough, but it had given her an idea. Those boys, especially Red Hoodie and his friends, needed structure, guidance, and someone who saw their potential rather than their posturing. And Eleanor Washington, retired police chief with 35 years of experience working with troubled youth,
had plenty of time on her hands these days. Eleanor sat in Principal Gardner's office,
her posture perfect despite the uncomfortable plastic chair. She wore a simple navy pantsuit, not her formal police uniform which had been packed away for years, but something that still carried an air of authority. The principal, a balding man in his 50s with reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewed the file in front of him with a deepening frown. "Mrs. Washington, I appreciate your interest in these boys, but I'm not sure what you're proposing would work," he said, finally closing the folder. "Tyler especially," he nodded toward the name at the top of the file, whom Eleanor knew as Red Hoodie, "has been a challenge since 7th grade. We've tried mentorship programs, detention, parent conferences. Nothing seems to stick." Eleanor nodded, acknowledging his frustration. "I understand, Principal Gardner. Believe me, I've seen my share of troubled youth over the years. That's precisely why I think my approach might succeed where others haven't." It had been a week since the incident at the basketball court, and Eleanor had spent that time making phone calls, pulling strings, and developing a plan. Retirement had not diminished her network of contacts throughout the city, former colleagues, community leaders, and city officials who still respected the woman who had led the police department through some of its most challenging years. "You're proposing to take these 5 boys, our most disruptive students, and run some kind of, what exactly? A junior police academy?" Principal Gardner adjusted his glasses, looking skeptical. "Not exactly," Eleanor replied. "I'm proposing a community leadership program, twice a week after school plus Saturday mornings. The boys would learn discipline, yes, but also practical skills, conflict resolution, public speaking, community service, the kinds of skills that build confidence and purpose." The principal leaned back in his chair. "And you think Tyler, Damon, and the others will voluntarily sign up for this?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "I've spoken with Judge Williams at juvenile court. He's willing to offer this as an alternative to community service for the 3 boys who have pending cases. As for the other 2, I've already had conversations with their parents. They're supportive." Principal Gardner raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed despite himself. "You've been busy." "I don't believe in wasting time when young lives are at stake," Eleanor said simply. There was a knock at the office door, and the school secretary poked her head in. "They're here, Mr. Gardner," the principal nodded. "Send them in, please." Eleanor remained seated as the 5 boys filed into the office. They stopped short when they saw her, recognition and confusion crossing their faces. "You?" Tyler, Red Hoodie, blurted out. "What are you doing here?" "Mrs. Washington is here to discuss a program she's developing," Principal Gardner said, his tone making it clear he expected respectful behavior. "A program that might interest all of you. Please sit down." The only seating available was a small couch against the wall and 1 additional chair. The boys hesitated, then awkwardly arranged themselves, Tyler in baseball cap taking the chairs while Damon, glasses boy, and gray sweatshirt perched uncomfortably on the couch. "I believe you've already met Mrs. Washington," Principal Gardner continued. "Yeah, she's the old lady from the park," said baseball cap, whose real name Eleanor had learned was Ronnie. "That's one way to put it," Eleanor said with a hint of amusement, though I prefer Eleanor, or Mrs. Washington if we're being formal. "Mrs. Washington has an interesting background," the principal said. "Before retiring, she served as the chief of police for our city, the first woman to hold that position and the first African American." This revelation landed like a stone dropped in still water. The boys stared at Eleanor with new eyes, disbelief mingling with dawning comprehension. "Wait, you were a cop?" Tyler asked, his voice cracking slightly. For 35 years, Eleanor confirmed calmly. So when we... Damon trailed off, clearly remembering their first encounter when they had tried to intimidate her. When you followed me home from the grocery store. Yes, I was fully aware of what was happening, Eleanor said. I've faced much more intimidating situations than a few teenagers trying to look tough. Gray Sweatshirt, whose name was Luis, let out a small, nervous laugh. No wonder you weren't scared. I was concerned, Eleanor corrected, but not for myself. I was concerned about the choices you were making, the direction you were heading. She leaned forward slightly. I'm still concerned. That's why I'm here. Principal Gardner cleared his throat. Mrs. Washington has proposed a special program for the 5 of you. An alternative to your current disciplinary paths. What kind of program? Asked the boy with glasses, who Eleanor now knew was named Henry. Eleanor took over the explanation, outlining her plan in clear, straightforward terms. The community center had agreed to provide space. She had recruited former colleagues, detectives, patrol officers, and community relations specialists to serve as occasional guest instructors. The program would cover everything from basic life skills to specialized training in conflict resolution and community leadership. So basically, it's like being in a junior police academy? Ronnie asked, echoing Principal Gardner's earlier question. No, Eleanor said firmly. This isn't about becoming police officers. This is about becoming leaders, about understanding your community and your place in it, about making better choices. The boys exchanged glances, a mix of skepticism and curiosity on their faces. Do we have a choice? Tyler asked, an edge of defiance in his voice. There are always choices, Eleanor replied. For 3 of you with cases in juvenile court, Judge Williams is offering this as an alternative to standard community service. For the others, your parents have expressed interest, but ultimately, yes, it's your decision. Luis, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. My mom said I should do it. She said it would look good for college applications. It would, Eleanor confirmed. But that's not why you should join. You should join because you want something different for yourselves. Tyler leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. And what makes you think you know what we want? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I don't, that's the point. This program isn't about me telling you who to be or what to want. It's about giving you the tools to figure that out for yourselves. There was a moment of silence as the boys digested this. Principal Gardner watched the exchange with interest, clearly impressed by Eleanor's approach. When would it start? Henry asked, adjusting his glasses. Next Monday, Eleanor said. After school at the Westside Community Center. We'd meet from 4 to 6 on Mondays and Wednesdays and from 9 to noon on Saturdays. That's a lot of time, Ronnie complained. It is, Eleanor agreed, because meaningful change takes time and commitment. She looked around at each of them. I'm willing to commit my time to you. The question is whether you're willing to commit yours. Another silence fell over the room. Eleanor didn't rush to fill it. In her experience, people needed time to process important decisions, especially young people who were unused to having real choices presented to them. Finally, Damon spoke up. I'll do it, he said quietly. My grandma already said I should. She said I'm better than the choices I've been making. Eleanor nodded, a small smile of approval on her face. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. I guess I'm in too, Henry said with a shrug that attempted casualness but couldn't quite hide his interest. My parents are always saying I need more extracurriculars for my college, eh? Applications anyway, Luis nodded. Yeah, me too. All eyes turned to Ronnie and Tyler, the 2 who had been most confrontational during their previous encounters. Ronnie looked to Tyler, clearly waiting for his lead. Tyler held Eleanor's gaze for a long moment, challenging her. She met his look calmly, neither backing down nor pushing. What happens if we start and then decide it's not for us? He asked finally. Then you leave the program, Eleanor said simply, and face whatever consequences would have been in place had you not joined. But, she added, I'd ask that you give it a genuine try first. At least a month. Tyler thought about this, then gave a single sharp nod. Fine, 1 month. But I'm not promising anything after that. Fair enough, Eleanor said, extending her hand to him. After a moment's hesitation, Tyler reached out and shook it. His grip firmer than necessary, a small assertion of strength that Eleanor chose not to comment on. Principal Gardner looked pleased and somewhat surprised at the outcome. Well, that's settled then. Mrs. Washington will provide all the details and the school will adjust your schedules accordingly. He stood, signaling that the meeting was over. "I expect to hear good reports about all of you." The boys filed out of the office, their body language a mix of uncertainty and resignation. Eleanor remained seated, watching them go. "Do you really think you can reach them?" Principal Gardner asked once the door had closed behind them. Eleanor gathered her purse and stood up. "I've spent my career dealing with people at their worst moments, Mr. Gardner. I've learned that most people want to do better. They just don't always know how, or they don't believe they can." She smiled. "Those boys are no different. They just need someone to see past their attitudes to their potential." As she walked through the school hallways toward the exit, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since retirement. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, changing ingrained behaviors never was, but she was ready for the challenge after all. She hadn't become the city's first black female police chief by backing down from difficult situations. 3 weeks into the program, Eleanor stood at the front of the community center's multi-purpose room, watching as the boys worked through a conflict resolution scenario. They had come a long way from that first awkward session, when they had slouched in their chairs, arms crossed, clearly just putting in time because they had to. "No, that's not what I meant," Henry said, frustration clear in his voice as he adjusted his glasses. "If we approach Mr. Wilson about the graffiti issue like that, he's just going to get defensive." "Then what's your brilliant idea?" Tyler challenged, still the quickest to push back when things didn't go his way. Henry hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "We need to show him we understand his concerns first, acknowledge that the wall is his property, and the graffiti affects his business, then suggest the mural as a solution, not just because we want to do it, but because it would actually help him." Eleanor nodded approvingly. The scenario, convincing a local business owner to allow youth artists to convert a frequently vandalized wall into a community mural, was one she had chosen specifically because it mirrored real challenges in their neighborhood. And Henry, the quietest of the 5 when they started, was now finding his voice. "Henry's right," Damon added, surprising everyone. He had been the most withdrawn during the first 2 weeks, rarely offering opinions unless directly asked. "My grandmother always says people don't care what you know until they know that you care." "Your grandmother sounds like a smart woman," Eleanor said, pleased to see Damon contributing voluntarily. "That's exactly the approach that builds bridges instead of walls." "Remember what we discussed about perspective taking?" Luis raised his hand, another positive change. When they started, he would just blurt out whatever came to mind. "It's about seeing the situation from their point of view first before trying to get them to see yours." "Precisely," Eleanor confirmed. "Empathy before argument. Connection before correction." Ronnie, who was playing the role of the business owner in their scenario, scratched his head. "So instead of coming at me with demands, you're saying they should start by acknowledging my concerns?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "People are much more likely to listen to your ideas when they feel heard themselves." She checked the clock on the wall. "Let's take this from the top one more time, and then we'll wrap up for today." As the boys reset their positions and began the scenario again, Eleanor reflected on their progress. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still moments of resistance and backsliding, but the change was undeniable. The most surprising development had been Tyler. Behind his defiant exterior was a natural leader with a sharp mind. Once Eleanor had figured out that he needed to be challenged, not just instructed, his engagement had improved dramatically. She had started giving him leadership roles within the group, and his commanding presence was now being channeled in a positive direction. After they finished the scenario, much more successfully this time, Eleanor dismissed them for the day. "Remember, Saturday we'll be putting these skills into practice. We're meeting at Parkside Plaza at 9 a.m. sharp to set up for the community cleanup. Bring work gloves if you have them." The boys gathered their things, chatting among themselves as they headed for the door. It was another positive sign. They had arrived as individuals, barely speaking to each other outside their established friendships, but were now leaving as a cohesive unit. "Mrs. Washington?" Damon hung back as the others left. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course," Eleanor replied, gesturing to a nearby table. They sat down, and Eleanor noticed that Damon seemed nervous, fidgeting with the zipper of his jean jacket. "My grandmother wants to meet you," he blurted out finally. "She says she wants to thank you in person for helping me get my act together." Eleanor smiled warmly. "I'd be delighted to meet her. She clearly has a significant influence on you. Damon nodded, looking down at his hands. She's raised me since I was 7. After my mom, well, she couldn't take care of me anymore. This was more personal information than Damon had shared previously, and Eleanor recognized the trust it represented. That couldn't have been easy for either of you, she said gently. It wasn't. Still isn't sometimes. He glanced up briefly, then back down. Grandma works 2 jobs. She's a nurse's aide during the day and cleans offices at night. I don't see her much except weekends. Eleanor nodded, understanding better now some of Damon's choices. Without adult supervision or guidance after school, it was easy for teens to drift toward trouble. She's making a special dinner on Sunday after church, Damon continued. She asked if you could come. It's nothing fancy or anything. I would be honored, Eleanor said sincerely. What time should I arrive? They worked out the details and Damon seemed relieved when they finished, as if he'd accomplished something difficult but important. As he left, Eleanor realized this was the first social invitation any of the boys had extended to her. It represented a significant shift in how they viewed her. No longer just an authority figure, but someone they were beginning to trust and respect. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for their first community service project. Eleanor arrived at Parkside Plaza 30 minutes early to set up, but was surprised to find Henry already there, organizing garbage bags and cleaning supplies on a folding table. Good morning, Mrs. Washington, he greeted her, looking pleased with himself. I thought I'd get a head start. That's very responsible of you, Henry, Eleanor said, setting down the box of donuts she had brought. I appreciate the initiative. As they worked together to set up, Henry seemed more relaxed than usual. My dad said this program has been good for me. He shared unexpectedly. He said I seem more confident. Do you feel more confident? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. Henry considered this, then nodded slowly. I guess I do. Before, I always felt like I had to go along with whatever Tyler and Ronnie wanted, even when I knew it wasn't smart. Now I feel like I can say what I really think. That's real growth, Henry, Eleanor told him. Being true to yourself takes courage. Before Henry could respond, Luis arrived, followed closely by Damon. Both boys immediately pitched in, helping to finish the setup without being asked. Eleanor noticed how they now worked seamlessly together, anticipating what needed to be done. By the time community volunteers began arriving for the cleanup, all 5 boys were present and ready. Tyler and Ronnie had been the last to show up, but they were on time and dressed appropriately in clothes that could get dirty. Eleanor gathered everyone in a circle for introductions and instructions. About 20 community members had joined them, families with children, a few elderly residents, and a handful of college students. Eleanor introduced the boys as leaders of the project, putting them in charge of distributing supplies and directing volunteers to different areas of the plaza. The transformation was remarkable. Tyler, who had initially balked at participating in a lame cleanup, was now energetically organizing a team to tackle the graffiti-covered retaining wall. Ronnie was showing a group of younger children how to safely pick up trash without touching anything dangerous. Luis and Damon were working with several elderly residents on planting flowers in the center beds, while Henry managed the supply station, keeping track of what was being used and what was needed. Eleanor circulated among the groups, offering guidance when necessary but mostly stepping back and letting the boys lead. As the morning progressed, she couldn't help feeling a sense of pride in their accomplishments. They weren't just cleaning up trash and planting flowers. They were building connections with their community and seeing themselves as contributors rather than troublemakers. During a water break, Eleanor overheard an older woman speaking to Damon. You young men are doing a wonderful job, the woman said, genuine appreciation in her voice. This plaza hasn't looked this good in years. Damon's face lit up with a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. Thank you, ma'am. We're trying to make a difference. Well, you certainly are, the woman assured him, patting his arm before moving on. Eleanor watched as Damon stood a little taller, his entire demeanor changed by this simple acknowledgement. This was what she had hoped for when she designed the program. Moments when the boys could experience the power of positive recognition, so different from the negative attention they were accustomed to receiving. By noon, the plaza looked transformed. Trash had been removed, flowers planted, Benches repainted, and even the graffiti wall had been prepped for a proper mural that would be completed in the coming weeks. As volunteers began to disperse, several stopped to compliment the boys on their leadership. Eleanor gathered them for a final debriefing, making sure to highlight specific strengths she had observed in each of them. "Tyler, the way you organized that wall team was impressive. You have a natural ability to motivate people. Ronnie, I noticed how patient you were with those children. Luis and Damon, the flower beds look beautiful. That took real attention to detail. And Henry, your organizational skills kept everything running smoothly." The boys absorbed the praise with varying degrees of comfort. Tyler with a shrug that couldn't quite hide his pleasure, Ronnie with a wide grin, Luis and Damon with quiet smiles, and Henry with a blush and a nod. "This is just the beginning," Eleanor told them. "Today you showed what's possible when you channel your energy in a positive direction. How does it feel?" There was a moment of silence as they considered her question. Then Tyler, still their unofficial leader, spoke up. "It feels different," he admitted, searching for the right words. "Like people were looking at us because of something good we did, not because they thought we were up to no good." The others nodded in agreement, and Eleanor could see in their expressions that something fundamental had shifted. They had glimpsed a different version of themselves today, a version that commanded respect rather than fear, that built up rather than tore down. It wasn't a complete transformation. Eleanor knew there would still be setbacks and struggles ahead. But for the first time, she was certain that the program was working. These boys who had once tried to intimidate an elderly woman walking home with groceries were discovering that they possessed the capacity for leadership, empathy, and positive change. And that discovery, Eleanor knew from experience, could alter the entire trajectory of their lives. 6 months had passed since that first day when Eleanor Washington had encountered 5 teenage boys on her walk home from the grocery store. 6 months of twice-weekly meetings, Saturday morning activities, and gradual, sometimes uneven progress. Now, on a warm fall afternoon, Eleanor stood at the back of the community center's main hall, watching with quiet pride as Tyler addressed the gathered audience. "Before I met Mrs. Washington, I was headed nowhere good," Tyler admitted, his usual bravado softened by sincerity. He stood straight at the podium, wearing a button-down shirt instead of his trademark red hoodie. "I was angry all the time, looking for respect in all the wrong places. But Mrs. Washington saw something in me, in all of us, that we couldn't see in ourselves." The audience, a mix of family members, school officials, community leaders, and fellow students, listened attentively. This graduation ceremony for the first cohort of the Youth Leadership Initiative represented more than just the completion of a program. It symbolized a profound shift in how these 5 young men viewed themselves and how the community viewed them. Eleanor scanned the crowd, noting Principal Gardner's approving nod, the beaming face of Damon's grandmother in the front row, and Judge Williams, whose early support had been crucial to getting the program off the ground. Even more satisfying was seeing the boys' peers, other students from Franklin High who had signed up for the next cohort of the program, inspired by the visible changes in Tyler and his friends. "We started out thinking this was just another punishment," Tyler continued, gesturing to his 4 friends who sat behind him on the stage. "Another adult telling us what to do, but it turned into something else. Mrs. Washington didn't just teach us about leadership or conflict resolution or community service. She taught us about dignity, hers and ours." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest at these words, dignity. It was exactly what she had hoped. They would discover their own inherent worth and the worth of others. Tyler wrapped up his speech by inviting his fellow graduates to join him at the podium. The 5 boys stood together, no longer the disconnected, defensive teenagers who had first entered her program, but a united group who had learned to support and challenge each other. After presenting each boy with a certificate and a personalized letter of recommendation, Eleanor stepped up to the microphone. Public speaking had been part of her job as police chief, but this felt different, more personal, more meaningful. "When I retired 3 years ago," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her age, "I thought my days of making a difference in this community were behind me. I was content to tend my garden, read my mystery novels, and enjoy the quiet life I had earned after 35 years of service." She paused, looking at the 5 young men who had changed that plan entirely. "Then I met these extraordinary young men, though our first meeting wasn't exactly friendly. This brought knowing, chuckles from those who had heard the story. What began as an uncomfortable encounter on a sidewalk evolved into one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. As Eleanor continued her speech, she reflected on the journey they had taken together. There had been setbacks, of course, moments when old habits resurfaced, when trust was tested, when progress seemed to stall or even reverse. The turning point had come about 3 months in, during a conflict that could have derailed everything. It had been a regular Wednesday session, focused on personal accountability. Eleanor had asked each boy to share a situation where they had made a poor choice and how they would handle it differently now. When Tyler's turn came, he had grown defensive, reverting to his old patterns of deflection and blame. "Why are we always talking about our mistakes?" he had demanded. "Like we're the only ones who mess up. Adults mess up all the time, but nobody makes them sit in circles and talk about it." The tension in the room had been palpable. The other boys had looked to Eleanor, expecting her to assert her authority, perhaps even kick Tyler out for his disrespect. Instead, she had nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right." Plies and directing volunteers to different areas of the plaza. The transformation was remarkable. Tyler, who had initially balked at participating in a lame cleanup, was now energetically organizing a team to tackle the graffiti-covered retaining wall. Ronnie was showing a group of younger children how to safely pick up trash without touching anything dangerous. Luis and Damon were working with several elderly residents on planting flowers in the center beds, while Henry managed the supply station, keeping track of what was being used and what was needed. Eleanor circulated among the groups, offering guidance when necessary but mostly stepping back and letting the boys lead. As the morning progressed, she couldn't help feeling a sense of pride in their accomplishments. They weren't just cleaning up trash and planting flowers. They were building connections with their community and seeing themselves as contributors rather than troublemakers. During a water break, Eleanor overheard an older woman speaking to Damon. "You young men are doing a wonderful job," the woman said, genuine appreciation in her voice. "This plaza hasn't looked this good in years." Damon's face lit up with a smile that transformed his usually serious expression. "Thank you, ma'am. We're trying to make a difference." "Well, you certainly are," the woman assured him, patting his arm before moving on. Eleanor watched as Damon stood a little taller, his entire demeanor changed by this simple acknowledgement. This was what she had hoped for when she designed the program. Moments when the boys could experience the power of positive recognition, so different from the negative attention they were accustomed to receiving. By noon, the plaza looked transformed. Trash had been removed, flowers planted, benches repainted, and even the graffiti wall had been prepped for a proper mural that would be completed in the coming weeks. As volunteers began to disperse, several stopped to compliment the boys on their leadership. Eleanor gathered them for a final debriefing, making sure to highlight specific strengths she had observed in each of them. "Tyler, the way you organized that wall team was impressive. You have a natural ability to motivate people. Ronnie, I noticed how patient you were with those children. Luis and Damon, the flower beds look beautiful. That took real attention to detail. And Henry, your organizational skills kept everything running smoothly." The boys absorbed the praise with varying degrees of comfort. Tyler, with a shrug that couldn't quite hide his pleasure. Ronnie with a wide grin, Luis and Damon with quiet smiles, and Henry with a blush and a nod. "This is just the beginning," Eleanor told them. "Today you showed what's possible when you channel your energy in a positive direction. How does it feel?" There was a moment of silence as they considered her question. Then Tyler, still their unofficial leader, spoke up. "It feels different," he admitted, searching for the right words. "Like people were looking at us because of something good we did, not because they thought we were up to no good." The others nodded in agreement, and Eleanor could see in their expressions that something fundamental had shifted. They had glimpsed a different version of themselves today, a version that commanded respect rather than fear, that built up rather than tore down. It wasn't a complete transformation. Eleanor knew there would still be setbacks and struggles ahead, but for the first time, she was certain that the program was working. These boys, who had once tried to intimidate an elderly woman walking home with groceries, were discovering that they possessed the capacity for leadership, empathy, and positive change. And that discovery, Eleanor knew from experience, could alter the entire trajectory of their lives. 6 months had passed since that first day when Eleanor Washington had encountered 5 teenage boys on her walk home from the grocery store. 6 months of twice-weekly meetings, Saturday morning activities, and gradual, sometimes uneven progress. Now, on a warm fall afternoon, Eleanor stood at the back of the community center's main hall, watching with quiet pride as Tyler addressed the gathered audience. "Before I met Mrs. Washington, I was headed nowhere good," Tyler admitted, his usual bravado softened by sincerity. He stood straight at the podium, wearing a button-down shirt instead of his trademark red hoodie. "I was angry all the time, looking for respect in all the wrong places. But Mrs. Washington saw something in me and all of us that we couldn't see in ourselves." The audience, a mix of family members, school officials, community leaders, and fellow students, listened attentively. This graduation ceremony for the first cohort of the Youth Leadership Initiative represented more than just the completion of a program. It symbolized a profound shift in how these 5 young men viewed themselves and how the community viewed them. Eleanor scanned the crowd, noting Principal Gardner's approving nod, the beaming face of Damon's grandmother in the front row, and Judge Williams, whose early support had been crucial to getting the program off the ground. Even more satisfying was seeing the boys' peers, other students from Franklin High who had signed up for the next cohort of the program, inspired by the visible changes in Tyler and his friends. "We started out thinking this was just another punishment," Tyler continued, gesturing to his 4 friends who sat behind him on the stage. "Another adult telling us what to do, but it turned into something else. Mrs. Washington didn't just teach us about leadership or conflict resolution or community service. She taught us about dignity, hers and ours." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest at these words. Dignity. It was exactly what she had hoped. They would discover their own inherent worth and the worth of others. Tyler wrapped up his speech by inviting his fellow graduates to join him at the podium. The 5 boys stood together, no longer the disconnected, defensive teenagers who had first entered her program, but a united group who had learned to support and challenge each other. After presenting each boy with a certificate and a personalized letter of recommendation, Eleanor stepped up to the microphone. Public speaking had been part of her job as police chief, but this felt different, more personal, more meaningful. "When I retired 3 years ago," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her age, "I thought my days of making a difference in this community were behind me. I was content to tend my garden, read my mystery novels, and enjoy the quiet life I had earned after 35 years of service." She paused, looking at the 5 young men who had changed that plan entirely. "Then I met these extraordinary young men, though our first meeting wasn't exactly friendly." This brought knowing chuckles from those who had heard the story. What began as an uncomfortable encounter on a sidewalk evolved into one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. As Eleanor continued her speech, she reflected on the journey they had taken together. There had been setbacks, of course, moments when old habits resurfaced, when trust was tested, when progress seemed to stall or even reverse. The turning point had come about 3 months in, during a conflict that could have derailed everything. It had been a regular Wednesday session, focused on personal accountability. Eleanor had asked each boy to share a situation where they had made a poor choice, and how they would handle it differently now. When Tyler's turn came, he had grown defensive, reverting to his old patterns of deflection and blame. "Why are we always talking about our mistakes?" he had demanded. "Like we're the only ones who mess up. Adults mess up all the time, but nobody makes them sit in circles and talk about it." The tension in the room had been palpable. The other boys had looked to Eleanor, expecting her to assert her authority, perhaps even kick Tyler out for his disrespect. Instead, she had nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right.